Blood never looked so ordinary until it stained the white floor tiles. For Marcus, every shift began with someone else's tragedy, but tonight, the real accident was the way his chest tightened when Daniel brushed past him. The ER smelled of antiseptic, stale coffee, and too many sleepless nights. Marcus, the nurse who everyone called dependable but invisible, had stopped believing anything extraordinary could happen between these sterile walls. Yet, there was Daniel, the trauma doctor, who carried himself like a fortress, all hard edges and unsmiling commands. People whispered about his brilliance, his arrogance, his icy detachment. But Marcus saw something no one else seemed to notice: the loneliness flickering in Daniel's eyes when he thought no one was watching. It had been 6 months since Marcus transferred to St. James Memorial Hospital, and in that time, Daniel had barely said more than a clipped thanks or good work. Still, Marcus couldn't shake the memory of one night. Their first midnight code blue together when Daniel's gloved hand had pressed over his to steady a trembling patient's vein. Just a moment, just clinical necessity. But Marcus remembered the warmth of that hand long after the patient had been wheeled away. And now, here they were again. The night was quiet, unusually so, the ER dim and hushed except for the occasional beeping monitor. Marcus was wiping down a gurney when Daniel walked in, sleeves rolled up, collar slightly loosened. He looked tired, more than tired, actually. He looked breakable. "You're still here," Daniel muttered, his voice softer than usual. Marcus smirked, trying to cover the sudden flutter in his chest. "You say that like I ever leave." For a heartbeat, Daniel almost smiled. Almost. Then the mask slid back into place, but Marcus had seen if had felt it. Something was shifting between them, something he didn't dare name yet. The truth was, both men carried wounds the hospital couldn't heal. Marcus had left behind a small town where loving another man meant exile, his family's silence still echoing in his ears every holiday season. Daniel, on the other hand, never spoke of his personal life, but rumor had it he had once been engaged. Marcus didn't believe in gossip, yet sometimes, in the quiet lull before dawn, he wondered what kind of heartbreak had made Daniel so unwilling to let anyone close. That night, when a teenage boy was rushed in after a car accident, Marcus and Daniel moved together like they were two halves of one instinct. Blood, metal, screams. It was chaos, but their hands met, their voices found rhythm, and the boy lived. Afterward, covered in sweat and shadows, Marcus found himself outside on the loading dock, trying to catch his breath. Daniel came out minutes later, shoulders tense, face unreadable. "You did good in there," Daniel said, leaning against the brick wall. "Thanks," Marcus replied, shoving his hands in his pockets to hide the tremor. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was thick, like the air before a storm. "You ever think about how unfair it all is?" Daniel asked suddenly. His voice cracked, just enough for Marcus to hear the man beneath the armor. "We patch people up, send them back out, but no one patches us up." "Not really." Marcus swallowed hard. "Maybe we're supposed to patch each other." It was reckless, the kind of thing you shouldn't say to a man like Daniel. But when Daniel turned his head, eyes shining faintly in the dim security light, Marcus knew he had hit something raw and real. That was the beginning. The nights that followed blurred into an ache Marcus both dreaded and craved. He found himself noticing everything: how Daniel tapped his pen when he was thinking, how his voice lowered when he was truly worried about a patient, how his laughter, rare, almost mythical, sounded like something Marcus wanted to bottle up and keep forever. But Daniel was a fortress, and every time Marcus thought he saw a crack, Daniel reinforced the walls. He avoided personal conversations, brushed off Marcus's light-hearted attempts to connect, and buried himself in work. Still, every so often, their hands brushed in the chaos of saving a life, or their eyes lingered too long in the silence of an empty hallway. One particularly grueling shift, Marcus collapsed into the staff lounge at 3 a.m., only to find Daniel already there, head in his hands. For the first time, Marcus saw him not as the brilliant doctor, not as the unshakable presence everyone feared and admired, but as a man who was exhausted and hurting. "Daniel," Marcus whispered, crossing the room. You don't always have to carry it alone. Daniel looked up sharply, anger flashing before it dissolved into something more fragile. He didn't reply. He didn't have to, because when Marcus sat down beside him, close enough for their shoulders to brush, Daniel didn't move away. That small act felt more intimate than any touch Marcus had ever known. And yet, intimacy was dangerous here. James wasn't the kind of place where two men could easily exist as more than colleagues. Gossip spread like infection, and judgment hung in the air heavier than the scent of bleach. Marcus knew the risks. He knew the bruises of being seen. But sitting there with Daniel in the half-light, he thought maybe some risks were worth taking. The first time Daniel truly let go was unexpected. A patienta child had slipped away despite their best efforts. Marcus found him afterward in the supply closet, fists clenched, jaw trembling. "Get out," Daniel rasped. "No," Marcus said softly, stepping closer. "You don't have to do this alone." Something broke then, not in anger, but in surrender. Daniel's shoulders sagged, his head dropped, and when Marcus reached out, Daniel didn't push him away. Instead, he leaned into the touch, forehead pressed against Marcus's collarbone, silent tears staining the thin fabric of his scrubs. Marcus held him, steady and unflinching, even as his own heart threatened to shatter from the weight of that trust. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was something deeper. It was the kind of intimacy that rewrote the rules. That night, when Marcus walked home under the fading stars, he realized something terrifying. He was already in too deep. Daniel wasn't a storm to survive, he was the gravity Marcus couldn't escape. And maybe, just maybe, Daniel felt it too. The hospital at night was a strange kind of purgatory, half asleep, half alive, lingering somewhere between endings and beginnings. For Marcus, those long hours had always meant routine. Charting vitals, restocking supplies, refilling coffee. But now every shift felt different. Because now every shift meant Daniel. The doctor had not spoken of that night in the supply closet. He hadn't thanked Marcus, hadn't acknowledged the way he had let himself fall into Marcus's arms. If anything, Daniel had pulled further into himself. He barked orders with sharper edges, moved through patients with mechanical precision, and kept his distance like he was afraid of what had cracked inside him. And yet, the closeness lingered. Their eyes found each other more often. Their conversations, though still brief, carried an undertone of awareness that neither could hide. Marcus felt it like a hum in his veins, a constant reminder that something had shifted. Came to a head 2 weeks later, during one of the busiest nights Marcus could remember. The ER was overflowing car accidents, overdoses, a stabbing that left the floor slick with blood. Marcus moved in sync with Daniel through the chaos, their hands brushing in the exchange of instruments, their voices blending in orders shouted over the noise. At one point, Marcus looked up and caught Daniel staring not at the patient, but at him. Their eyes locked, and in that suspended second, the whole world seemed to disappear. The patient survived. But Marcus knew something else had been born in that moment, something neither of them could deny any longer. It was after dawn when Marcus finally stumbled into the locker room, aching and sweat-soaked. He peeled off his scrub top, too tired to care about the way it clung to his skin. That's when the door opened, and Daniel walked in. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Marcus's chest heaved, and Daniel's gaze swept over him with something Marcus couldn't name: desire, maybe, or desperation. "You should go home," Daniel said finally, his voice low. "So should you," Marcus shot back, though his own throat felt tight. Daniel hesitated, then stepped closer. Too close. The air thickened between them, charged and fragile. Marcus's pulse hammered in his ears. "Marcus?" Daniel whispered, as if saying his name cost him something. Marcus swallowed hard. "You don't have to do this alone. Whatever it is you're carrying, let me help." For once, Daniel didn't retreat. His jaw clenched, his eyes burned, and then like a dam breaking reached out, fingers curling against Marcus's wrist. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. But it was more intimate than any kiss Marcus had ever known. "I don't know how," Daniel admitted, his voice rough. I don't know how to let anyone in. Marcus's heart ached. Then let me teach you. And just like that, the space between them collapsed. Daniel's lips found his, urgent and trembling, tasting of exhaustion and longing. The kiss was not gentle. It was raw, like two men trying to breathe after drowning. When they finally pulled apart, both were shaking. This can't happen, Daniel rasped, though his hand still clung to Marcus's wrist. Then why does it feel like it already has? Marcus replied softly. The days that followed were a blur of denial and inevitability. Daniel avoided Marcus in public, but in the quiet corners of the hospital, their gazes lingered too long. Their hands brushed too deliberately. It was a dangerous game, and they both knew it. Whispers had already started, nurses noting how often Marcus and Daniel were paired on cases, how Daniel's tone softened when speaking to him. Gossip in a hospital spread faster than infection, and Marcus knew what it could cost them. But he also knew what it cost to stay silent. He'd spent too many years biting back his truth, letting fear dictate his life. He wasn't going to do it again, not when what he felt for Daniel was more real than anything he'd ever known. One night, Marcus found Daniel alone in the doctor's lounge, staring at an untouched cup of coffee. Are you going to keep pretending nothing's happening between us? Marcus asked, leaning against the doorframe. Daniel's jaw tightened. You don't understand. If anyone finds out, I do understand. Marcus cut in. His voice was quiet but steady. I've lived my whole life hiding. But I'm done hiding, Daniel. Not from myself. Not from you. Daniel looked up, eyes blazing with conflict. You think it's that simple? You think I can just… Yes, Marcus said firmly. Because I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm just asking you to stop pushing me away. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Daniel stood, crossing the space between them in 3 long strides. He stopped inches away, his breath warm against Marcus's face. You make me want things I don't know how to want, he confessed. Marcus's chest tightened. Then let me show you. And this time, when their lips met, there was no hesitation. But love inside a hospital was never simple. Their stolen moments grew more reckless, hands brushing in supply closets, whispered conversations on stairwells, a lingering glance across the trauma bay that left Marcus dizzy. Each touch, each word, felt like both salvation and ruin. It was only a matter of time before someone noticed. One morning, after a long night shift, Marcus overheard 2 nurses whispering in the hallway. You ever notice how Dr. Hale is different around Marcus? One said. Different how? Like human. Like he actually feels something. Marcus's stomach dropped. He walked away quickly, but the damage was done. Gossip had teeth, and once it started, there was no stopping it. That night, Daniel found him outside on the loading dock again. His face was tense, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. They're talking, Daniel said flatly. I know. This could ruin us. Marcus stepped closer, his voice steady despite the fear in his gut. Or it could save us. Daniel's laugh was bitter. You don't understand what I stand to lose. And you don't understand what I've already lost, Marcus snapped. I've lost family, friends, whole pieces of myself because of who I am. But I'd lose it all again if it meant one night, one shift with you. Daniel's eyes burned with conflict, but his silence was answer enough. Marcus's chest ached. He turned away, forcing his voice to stay calm. You don't have to want this. But I can't keep pretending it doesn't mean everything to me. And with that, he walked back inside, leaving Daniel alone under the flickering light. The hospital was a place of healing, but sometimes it was also where hearts broke. Marcus had known that from the beginning. What he hadn't known was how much it would hurt when the man he loved was too afraid to love him back. But maybe, just maybe, Daniel wasn't as far gone as Marcus feared. Because later that night, when another patient flatlined and Marcus felt his world unravel, it was Daniel who grabbed his hand, not as a doctor, not as a colleague, but as a man who couldn't let him break alone. And for Marcus, that was enough to keep hoping. It was astonishing how fast the gossip spread. By the end of the week, Marcus could feel eyes on him every time he walked down the hall. Conversations quieted when he entered, and sometimes laughter followed when he passed. None of it was spoken outright, but he knew. They all knew something or thought they did. Daniel, of course, reacted by pulling further away. He was colder than ever in the trauma bay, more clipped in his words, more deliberate in avoiding Marcus unless absolutely necessary. He didn't even look at him unless forced to. It should have hurt Marcus more than it did. But the truth was, Marcus had caught too many glimpses of the man beneath the mask to believe the performance. He had seen the way Daniel's hand had trembled when he reached for him, the way his eyes had softened in moments no one else was meant to notice. No matter how convincing Daniel's facade was, Marcus knew the truth. Still, it wore on him. The long shifts, the whispers, the stolen glances that never became more. He began to wonder how much longer he could keep holding out hope for a man who seemed determined to break his own heart and Marcus's along with it. The breaking point came on a night when everything seemed to unravel at once. A mass casualty incident flooded the Aaron overturned bus on the freeway. Victims poured in. Broken bones, concussions, bleeding wounds. The staff moved like a machine, every hand needed, every second critical. Marcus and Daniel worked side by side for hours, their movements precise and seamless, until a boy no older than 15 coded on the table. Marcus pushed compressions into the boy's chest until his arms shook, while Daniel barked orders, voice raw with desperation. But they lost him. The silence afterward was unbearable. Marcus pulled off his gloves, feeling the weight of another life slipping through his hands. Daniel stood rigid, his face carved from stone. And then, without a word, he stormed out of the trauma bay. Marcus followed. He found Daniel in the stairwell, leaning against the wall like the weight of the world had finally crushed him. "Daniel," Marcus said softly, climbing one step at a time. "Don't," Daniel snapped, though his voice cracked. "Don't look at me like that. Like I'm human." Marcus stopped a step below, close enough to see the tremor in Daniel's jaw, the sheen of unshed tears in his eyes. "You are human," Marcus whispered. "You're allowed to break. You're allowed to feel." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. "Not here. Not in front of them. Not in front of you." Marcus's heart ached. He reached out slowly, deliberately, and laid a hand over Daniel's trembling fist. "Especially in front of me." For a moment, Daniel didn't move. Then, with a sound that was half a sob, half a growl, he pulled Marcus forward and kissed him fierce, desperate, as if he hated himself for needing it. The kiss was fire and fury, filled with everything Daniel had been holding back. Marcus let himself drown in it, his hands clutching Daniel's scrubs as though anchoring him to something real. When they finally broke apart, Daniel's forehead rested against Marcus's, both of them breathing hard. "This is going to destroy me," Daniel whispered. "Or it'll save you," Marcus said, voice shaking. "But you have to let it." The days that followed were like living in two different worlds. In the hospital, Daniel remained cold, distant, untouchable. But behind closed doors, in the shadows of the stairwell, in the quiet of the supply closet, in Marcus's small apartment after a shift, they became something else entirely. Daniel was different when he allowed himself to be vulnerable. His touch, once rigid, grew tender. His kisses, once frantic, became slow, searching, reverent. And Marcus learned the truth about him in fragments. About the fiancée he had lost years ago in a car accident, about the guilt that still gnawed at him, about the belief that letting anyone close meant losing them. "I can't lose again," Daniel confessed one night, lying beside Marcus in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. Marcus turned to face him, their legs tangled, their breaths mingling. "You won't. Not if you let me stay." Daniel closed his eyes, as if the hope itself hurt too much. But hope wasn't enough to shield them from the world outside. One morning, Marcus arrived to find his supervisor waiting in the nurse's station, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "There have been complaints," she said flatly, "about unprofessional conduct, about you and Dr. Hale." Marcus's stomach dropped. "That's not—" "You know how this looks, Marcus," she interrupted. And you know how this hospital handles rumors. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice steady. Are you saying my job's at risk? I'm saying you should be careful. Very careful. The warning was clear. That night, Marcus told Daniel. Daniel's reaction was immediate, visceral. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Daniel, we can't keep doing this. Not here. Not like this. Marcus's chest tightened. So what? You're just gonna throw it away? Pretend it doesn't mean anything? Daniel's jaw clenched, his eyes filled with torment. It means everything. That's the problem. The silence between them was deafening. Finally, Marcus whispered, I can't go back to pretending I don't feel this. I can't go back to being invisible. Daniel closed his eyes, as though the truth itself was unbearable. Then maybe you should walk away. Before I ruin you. Marcus stared at him, heartbreaking. You already have. And with that, he left. The days that followed were colder than any Marcus had known. He moved through shifts like a ghost, avoiding Daniel's gaze, burying himself in patience and charts. The whispers didn't stop, but Marcus no longer cared. What was left to lose? And yet, even in silence, the connection remained. He felt Daniel's eyes on him when he wasn't looking, saw the way Daniel's hand trembled when their fingers almost brushed, heard the unspoken words in every clipped command. It was agony, until one night, everything changed. A shooting downtown flooded the ER with victims. Chaos rained blood, screams, the metallic tang of fear. Marcus and Daniel worked side by side, wordless, their movements perfectly in sync. And then, in the middle of the storm, a bullet wound ruptured in Marcus's patient. Blood sprayed, and before Marcus could react, Daniel's hand shot out, covering his, steadying him. Their eyes locked across the chaos. In that instant, Marcus knew. No matter how much Daniel fought it, no matter how much fear ruled him, what they had was real, unstoppable. And Daniel knew it too. Later, when the last patient had been stabilized and the ER finally quieted, Daniel found Marcus in the locker room. His face was pale, his hands still trembling. I can't lose you, Daniel said hoarsely, the words spilling out like a confession. Not to gossip, not to fear, not to anything. Marcus's breath caught. Then don't. And for the first time, Daniel didn't run. For the first time in weeks, Daniel's words hung between them like oxygen, not poison. I can't lose you, he'd said, voice raw, stripped of the walls he'd built so carefully. And Marcus had felt it, not just heard it, but felt it like a heartbeat against his own. Still, the question lingered, fragile and dangerous. Was this enough? That night, Marcus lay awake in his apartment, replaying every second. The look in Daniel's eyes, the tremor in his voice, the way his hands had shaken, not with fear, but with longing. It was real. But would Daniel fight for it when the world came crashing in again? The answer came sooner than expected. 2 days later, the hospital board called Daniel into a meeting. Rumors had reached the top, twisted and sharpened into accusations of favoritism, inappropriate behavior, unprofessional conduct. Marcus wasn't called in, but he heard about it anyway. The whispers had teeth, and their bite was aimed squarely at Daniel. When Daniel walked out of the boardroom, his face was pale, his jaw tight. Marcus caught his arm in the hallway. What did they say? Marcus asked, heart pounding. Daniel glanced around, then lowered his voice. They gave me a choice. Deny everything and keep my reputation intact. Or, his voice faltered. Or what? Daniel's eyes burned. Or admit the truth and risk losing everything I've built here. Marcus's chest constricted. So what are you going to do? For a long moment, Daniel didn't answer. His silence said enough. It said he was still caught in the war between fear and desire, between the life he'd built and the love he couldn't let himself claim. Marcus let go of his arm. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned. I can't make that choice for you, but I won't let myself be your secret anymore. Not here. Not anywhere. And he walked away. The days after were agony. Marcus kept his head down, did his work, and tried not to look for Daniel in every corner. But his chest ached with the absence. He had fought so hard for the right to exist, to love openly, to be whole, and he refused to let fear drag him back into hiding. But one night, as dawn crept near, everything shifted again. The ER had quieted after a long, brutal shift. Marcus was restocking supplies when Daniel appeared in the doorway. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion, but his eyes were clearer than Marcus had ever seen them. "I told them," Daniel said simply. Marcus froze. "Told them what?" "The truth." Daniel stepped closer, his voice steady now. "That I care about you. That whatever they think, whatever they say, I won't lie about it anymore." Marcus's heart hammered. "Daniel." "I was terrified," Daniel admitted, closing the space between them. "But then I realized I've lived every day since I lost him, convinced I couldn't survive losing again. But the real loss would be never trying, never choosing you. And I won't make that mistake." The world seemed to stop. Marcus blinked back tears, his throat tight. "Are you sure?" Daniel reached for his hand, fingers intertwining with a firmness that left no room for doubt. "I've never been more sure." For once, the silence between them wasn't heavy, it was freeing. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Some colleagues supported them quietly, offering small smiles, nods of encouragement. Others whispered behind their backs, their judgment sharp. The board didn't fire Daniel, but they watched him closely, waiting for him to falter. Yet through it all, Marcus and Daniel stood together. They no longer hid in stairwells or empty closets. They sat together in the cafeteria. They walked out after shifts side by side. And though the whispers never fully stopped, Marcus noticed something else too. The way patients looked at them. Not with judgment, but with gratitude. They saw two men who healed bodies and hearts, who fought not just for life, but for love. And Daniel changed. Slowly but undeniably. The fortress crumbled. His laughter came easier, his touch gentler. He still carried his scars, his grief, his fear, but now he shared them with Marcus. One night, lying tangled in Marcus's bed after a long shift, Daniel whispered, "I didn't think I'd ever deserve this." "Deserve you." Marcus kissed his temple, his voice firm. "It's not about deserving. It's about choosing. And we chose each other." Daniel smiled, small, tentative, but real. Their love was not a fairy tale. It was messy, complicated, fragile. There were still nights when Daniel woke from nightmares, still days when Marcus felt the weight of judgment pressing in. But through it all, they held on. And slowly, the world began to change too. The whispers grew quieter, the support louder. A patient's mother once pulled Marcus aside, tears in her eyes, and said, "Thank you, not just for saving him, but for being brave. My son saw you too, and for the first time, he thinks maybe it's okay to be himself." Marcus carried those words with him like armor. Months later, on a quiet spring morning, Marcus and Daniel stood outside the hospital together, the sunrise painting the sky in gold. Their hands were clasped, no longer hidden, no longer trembling. "This place gave me wounds I thought would never heal," Daniel murmured, watching the light spread across the horizon. Marcus squeezed his hand. "And it gave you me." Daniel turned, gray eyes soft in a way Marcus once thought impossible. "Yeah, it gave me you." And with the sun rising behind them, they kissed, not desperate, not hidden, but open, steady, whole. For the first time, the night shifts didn't feel like purgatory anymore. They felt like home, because love, Marcus realized, was the greatest healing of all. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.